How does a water brand get away with calling itself Liquid Death and go from zero to $1.5 billion valuation in just a handful of years? Today, I'm going to break down the branding, design, and marketing behind Liquid Death, as well as the insights that we can learn from them to apply to our own brands and businesses. And I'm going to break all this down with my perspectives from running a consumer branding and design agency, as well as operating brands myself. My goal with this type of content is to share the insights and lessons and ideas that I have learned through firsthand experience, through the clients who I work with, and most importantly, if I were starting out my journey, things that I wish I would have known. So let's get into it. Okay, Liquid Death, the $1.5 billion water brand in 5 years. How did they get here? If you follow me on Instagram or TikTok, you know I talk to Liquid Death to death. I should stop talking about this brand. But why I think it is so fascinating and it is so interesting is not only is their marketing extremely dialed in, but there are a couple of interesting things going on here. They created a product in a totally commodity category. You can say that you have preferences for Poland Springs over Evian, but for the most part, it is hard to tell the difference between these brands. And so it is really kind of the marketing and look of the products as well as the distribution that really sells them, right? It is not a featured differentiation that you might have in a one supplement to another or one protein bar to another. So by default, it is really hard to differentiate when you sell a true commodity product, which is water. The second reason why I find them so interesting is that as a business, shipping heavy cans of water around the world and around the country is actually a pretty bad business model from a economic standpoint. It is expensive to do. And so this was probably why when you're kind of growing up or you look at the kind of water space, the brands that you're familiar with have just been around for a really long time. Poland Springs, Aquafina, et cetera. And they have all of the big guys, Pepsi, Coca-Cola behind them because it's a pretty expensive business to start. You're not seeing new water brands just emerging every day. So the fact that these guys just kind of came out of nowhere and have gotten some pretty solid traction and market share and awareness is really fascinating for both of these reasons. So I think it's a really good case study, and I think there are a lot of insights that you can apply for your own brand. There are many insights here that I think about as I build my own brands and, evaluate new brands. And, we're just going to talk through all of that. Now, for context, it's important to understand the origin story of Liquid Death here. So, because I'm going to reference a couple of these points later and why it matters. So, Mike Cesario is the CEO and founder of Liquid Death. He's been running it for 6 years, since 2018. Just a screen grab of his LinkedIn here. He's a creative guy. He was at a bunch of different ad agencies before. I want to say he was at Netflix, but don't quote me on that. But he comes from this world of kind of advertising and creative marketing and so on, and then goes and starts Liquid Death. The origin story or the concept for why he started Liquid Death, I believe, goes back to him noticing when he was on tour with some people, noticing that the people in the band were drinking water out of Monster Energy cans. And there's actually a really interesting insight behind that, right? And we're going to talk about that with the design and the intentionality behind the design of Liquid Death and how it actually fits into other social situations. But keep in mind that, yes, water was being drank out of empty Monster Energy drink cans because they wanted these band members wanted people to believe like, hey, no, we're still drinking this Monster Energy that sponsors our event and so on. We're not just drinking water here. So I'm going to come back to both of these points, but this is just a little high level context and origin story. And again, this brand was started in 2018. Now, I want to talk about this idea that a lot of brands miss. A lot of brand founders and people who create products and businesses, they will have their idea and then they'll figure out how to source that idea and bring it to life. And then they will just launch it and they'll set up their Shopify storefront. They'll have their brand and so on. But then they're like, shoot, do people want this? Do I actually have a market fit with my product? And a lot of the time, it turns out that they don't. And then the other portion of the time, you kind of iterate to go figure out that market fit. And so what Liquid Death did that was really interesting is that they did a good concept test. And so they filmed this video, and I'll link to the video in the notes here, but it's on YouTube. They filmed, so they had this idea, hey, we're going to create water. We're going to put it in a can. We're going to call it Liquid Death. We're going to make it like super punk rock. And Okay, well, on paper, that actually sounds like a horrible idea. Sounds like not a single person would ever buy that. So how do you de-risk this, right? Especially because we talked about the business of it. It's pretty expensive to start these types of businesses. So how do you de-risk this a little bit? Well, you see if there's some traction or there's some interest in this type of product. So they created this video, which was really funny because she opens up and she says, I'm a paid actor or actress, and I'm going to be talking about this. Watch the video because the video is much better than I'm going to do it justice. But it's like really funny. It's kind of like tongue in cheek. It's snarky. It's like pretty crazy. She's like waterboarding someone at the end. They filmed this video, and it's quoted that they filmed the video for about $1,500 and then put a couple $1,000 into like running it as a Facebook ad. So that's a pretty lean budget, under $5,000. And they put this on Facebook, and the Facebook video goes wild. And 2018, Facebook is still Facebook is still very much a place to be, but like Facebook, especially so back then, they get a lot of traction on Facebook. And with that traction, it was something like 100,000 people like the page and start commenting on the video. Then they post it on YouTube, and then it starts to get some traction there. So they say, okay, well, there's something here. We should go get some money for this. So they raise, like $1.5 million to bring this concept to life. Now, so that's how Liquid Death does that. And I think that's really smart, and it was necessary for them to get any investor, anyone, whether it's friends or family or a venture investor, which they got, venture financing, to get any financing for this, you need to prove this concept because it sounds preposterous. It sounds so stupid on paper. So they went and did that. Now, as a brand, right, if you were creating your own brand, how do you de-risk this? And this is something that, smart and seasoned brand owners do. And this is something that a lot of first-time founders make this mistake of not kind of rigorously concept testing. So I'll give you kind of basic example of this. So this is a brand called Sun Powder that I recently helped launch. And prior to placing any order for the product itself, we prior to even really dialing in the brand itself, we kind of mocked up what this package looks like. We got some 3D renders of it made. We made a really simple landing page that you could actually check out on, and then we set up some Facebook ads saying, hey, here's what this supplement does, here's how it helps with your skin health and so on. And we ran 3 ads on Facebook, and we're like, can we even get people to click on this ad? And if we can get people to click on that ugly ad and get to this ugly landing page and check out, which we did, we had like 4 people check out. It was not a profitable return on that ad spend that we spent, but we're like, hey, the ad looks like crap. The landing page looks like crap, but still people went through the checkout. So you're just kind of de-risking a little bit to see if there's some market demand and appetite. There are a ton of different case studies and examples that I can draw to both in like physical consumer products as well as digital consumer products on that idea. So if that's something that you're interested in, drop a comment and I'll make a dedicated video on that. But concept testing and kind of finding like some market and some gauge of interest in the product before you launch it is a super important idea. I can't overstate that enough. And so this was Liquid Death's take on it, which I think is super interesting. Now, let's get into the branding and positioning of Liquid Death and why I think there is something so important here, as well as the insights that you can apply. So when you look at the water aisle, we are typically used to seeing things like this. What do we see? Plastic bottles, clear plastic bottles, a lot of blues, a lot of greens. Why? Because when we think of water, we want to make sure that it is pure, that it is clear. Blues and greens reflect natural. I mean, if you look at the ocean, any body of water, it reflects like natural, earthy, clean, organic, right? That's why everything that you see here falls in that kind of visual spectrum. And so Liquid Death did something really interesting because almost on every dimension, packaging, form factor, colors, everything, they said, hey, we're actually going to do the total opposite. And the thing that's really interesting here is that when Liquid Death sits on a shelf here, it totally stands out, right? It'll immediately grab your attention. Now, I say that with the caveat that, hey, that can be a good thing, right? On the shelf test, there's the shelf test of, you can look at all the brands in your space and you can put your brand up next to that and say, hey, does mine stand out or does it blend in? In many categories, blending in can actually work to your benefit. Standing out can work to your benefit. But when you stand out in the wrong way, and I'll talk about how this is the wrong way to some degree, this can actually create a lot more work for you or be much more of a challenge for you. And I'll come back to that idea and where I think standing out to this degree has actually been a challenge for Liquid Death. And again, how they address it, and they address it super well. But here is an exercise or an important idea that at least is good to think about as you are designing a brand or you are creating a brand, which is, hey, everyone in this category goes with that clear plastic bottle. Everyone in this category goes with this, blue and green. So what if we didn't do a bottle? What if we did a can? And what if it wasn't clear? What if it was black? And what if instead of focusing on purity and pH and source, we don't say any of that stuff? We just make it heavy metal. We make it make it look like a beer, right? Nothing about this looks appealing as a water brand. If you were to just see it kind of in a vacuum, you'll just be like, what is that? And is it going to kill me? And it also says murder your thirst on it. So it almost seems like a novelty in that respect, right? But the insight is they stood out from everything else here and they took the extreme opposite approach on every dimension. Now, by doing this, what they've done is Liquid Death now sits so much more in the aesthetic space of craft beers, and alcohol, right? So you see Liquid Death next to all of this. Well, it's like, yeah, sure, it's in a tall boy can, but if it was in the whatever ounce size this is, it's like, okay, yeah, that just looks like another craft beer. And there's actually something really interesting about the opportunities that opens up for them. And I'll dive into that in a second, but it fits a lot more in this aesthetic space of alcohol brands. When designing a brand, I always do this exercise of asking this question of where does it live? Because when you are designing a brand or creating a kind of physical product, frankly, creating any type of product, it's not just the idea and how you execute on that idea, but you need to think about how you're going to acquire customers. And sure, you can have your Shopify store and run Facebook ads and all of this stuff, but it is getting so much more competitive and it is so much harder to build these brands. And so you need to be a lot more thoughtful in terms of how you are distributing your product. So if you are a water brand, right? People aren't really going to buy this online. They're going to buy it in stores. So sure, I can sell in grocery stores, but am I going to sell at restaurants? Am I going to sell at restaurants like this? Am I going to sell at high-end restaurants, at kind of mass market chain restaurants? What is the opportunity there? And this isn't to say that Liquid Death did this exercise and reverse engineered it, but you can use this exercise as you think about branding and design of your own brand, thinking about, hey, what are all of the potential avenues through which I want to distribute? Can I see it living there? And so what I mean by this is, if you look at this restaurant, beautiful alfresco scene, you get the vibe here, right? Elevated, upscale, chic, but casual, not too fancy. You could see a brand like Mountain Valley sitting beautifully on that table. It's like the brand lives there. The brand fits there. It fits into the aesthetic space. So I could get distribution through spaces like this. Putting Liquid Death on that table, that doesn't really seem to fit the vibe. That I might be hard pressed as an owner of this place. If Liquid Death is coming to pitch me on distributing their product there, I'd be like, it looks kind of scary. It doesn't really fit in here, right? So this is one exercise to think about when evaluating a brand, is what are the potential places that this brand could live? Now, this isn't a foolproof way, right? Could a place like this ultimately stock Liquid Death? Absolutely. And not stock Liquid Death? Mountain Valley? Absolutely. But it is just one more exercise as you evaluate and kind of design a brand. Now, by virtue of looking like this, looking like a beer brand, this actually opened up a lot of interesting opportunities for distribution of Liquid Death. In fact, the early places that they got into were tattoo parlors and liquor shops, because they have this aesthetic that fits into those spaces and looks really cool in those spaces. And by that, I mean, it looks really cool in those spaces in a way that you could never get Evian into those spaces, right? Evian's not sitting in a tattoo parlor and it's not sitting in a liquor shop. And so if you were designing a brand in a certain category, right? And so in this category, the category is water. And you look at water and you say, okay, well, water brands, prepackaged, ready to drink, whatever, water brands are typically sold in these XYZ locations. And sure, if we do the same thing that everyone else is doing, we're going to try to sell in all of the same places that they're selling. That's just going to make it competitive for me. But maybe if I do something different, and maybe if I think about my brand in a different way, I can actually stand out and find distribution in some of these other kind of specialty or places that you wouldn't traditionally expect the brand to live. And in doing that, what you can do is, you know, if you think about tattoo parlors, you think about liquor shops, like how many water brands do they ever carry? And so when you stand there as a one of one in that category, well, that's just more eyes on the product. That's just more people saying, looking over and being like, hey, what is that? Is that like a beer? Can I have a beer while I'm getting my tattoo? And then that starts this conversation, right? They say, oh no, that's actually water. And the water that we have here is Liquid Death. So your brand, so there's two ways of going about this. Your brand can actually, the way that you design it can open up specific distribution channels for you, which is really important. But you can also be smart about reverse engineering those channels, which I think is a super underappreciated idea. So say, for example, you know someone who runs festivals, right? They run festivals like Coachella and all of these things. Well, you could say, hey, that's actually the distribution channel, and I make an alcoholic product. Oh, that's actually the distribution channel that I want to get into because I know this person. I have this like personal connection with them. Okay, I'm not just going to make like a ready-to-drink beverage. Maybe I make a Jello shot because that is portable and doesn't require refrigeration, and I can package it this way, and I can do handouts or samplers that are super cheap at, again, festivals. You can... If you know your point of distribution and have an interesting in there, you can make some reverse engineer some decisions about the form factor in your brand to kind of make that higher likelihood that you'll get into those channels. Again, just another way to think about this. Distribution here. Okay, so early on, Liquid Death gets, tattoo parlors, liquor shops, all of that is great. And ultimately what they get over time is they get a partnership with Live Nation, right? So Liquid Death becomes a water provider for Live Nation, all of these concert venues over time. And let's go back to how this came about, right? How this came about came from relationships and investment and all of this stuff. But why does Liquid Death seem compelling in a setting like this? Now, Liquid Death seems compelling in a setting like this because this looks like a beer. And it doesn't just look like water. So when you're in context of bars and concerts where you might have people who are drinking and you might have people who are not drinking, well, hey, now you have a product that kind of fits into the aesthetic space of people who are drinking too. So these people don't necessarily look like outcasts. And this is like a small kind of behavioral design decision that basically makes you a part of an in-group rather than making you feel like an outcast for not participating in drinking alcohol. And independently, we can all say, I'm a very secure person. I don't have any issue, choosing to drink water when my friends are drinking. That's totally fine. But when it just does look like this, it just makes it a little bit easier. Say like, oh yeah, I'm just going to have Liquid Death and like no one's going to think twice about it, right? It just looks like I'm drinking a beer. So in the context of a concert venue or bar, this actually makes a lot of sense. The second thing is because this is an aluminum can that is not a plastic bottle, doesn't have a cap. It also means it's a not refillable bottle. And this is a guess, but for Live Nation, if they're like, hey, well, if we're selling all of these water bottles that are refillable, people only have to buy one. But if they're not refillable, well, you probably have to buy a few of them. So yeah, it's not great for us as the concert goers because we probably have to buy a handful of Liquid Deaths now. But this also, the form factor decision here makes it more appealing from a distribution standpoint for Liquid Death because for Live Nation, because they can say, hey, if you swap us in instead of Evian as your water provider, we can assume that people are going to buy more Liquid Death than they are Evian because you can refill an Evian. That's potentially one way. I'm guessing at the thinking there, right? That's not ironclad thinking, but it's a somewhat reasonable assessment of how both of these businesses are making that kind of decision. So there's a way that form factor can even impact your decision. Form factor being the can here versus a refillable bottle. Now let's get to the marketing of Liquid Death. So an important idea in the name Liquid Death. Actually, let's go back here. An important idea in the name of Liquid Death is, black can, this thing, it's like, looks super scary. It looks like a beer or an energy drink or something like Four Loko that's just going to kill me. The skeleton's face is melting off. It's like murder your thirst. Every element of this, both the name, the packaging, and everything, has built into it this inherent shareability, this inherent word of mouth, because when you have this or come across it and you figure out what it is, you want to tell someone about it, because you want to tell someone about it in a way that if you see Mountain Valley, you don't necessarily want to tell someone about that because, that's what I expect from a water bottle, right? It's like premium. It's this glass. It looks nice. It looks fresh, whatever. It's not noteworthy and inherently shareable that way. But because Liquid Death violates all of the norms in the category, well, they're doing themselves a little bit of a favor by saying, hey, we're just going to have that inbuilt word of mouth here, which is really going to help us, especially as a small brand. You need as much help and support as you can get to get traction for your brand and your business and to get people talking about it. The second thing that I love about the name Liquid Death, is that when you think of a brand, when you think of a brand name, or whenever I think of a concept or an idea, right, and evaluate, is that a good brand name? And can I envision how it creatively comes to life? When I say the name Liquid Death, it is a fertile creative ground for so many different ideas for how you can execute on that visually from a marketing standpoint, from an advertising standpoint, kind of one and the same. But so many different campaign ideas. I can visually see it. It's like, you could fill up an ice tub, right? Cold plunges are in. You could fill up an ice tub that's like the coldest ice tub that there is, and have people do some challenge after Ironman or triathlon or whatever. And it's like, that's the Liquid Death tub, brought to you by Liquid Death. That's like a stupid idea that just came to mind because of the name Liquid Death, right? There's so many different ways that you can think of ideas for the brand. So it's not often, or it's not always the case that you have a brand or a brand identity that is so strong that allows for so many creative ideas to easily and effortlessly flow from it. But because they're so dialed in on what they are, as well as such a powerful name, so much kind of comes to life, which they have brought to life through phenomenal marketing campaigns, social, out of home, TV ads, Super Bowl ads, partnerships that they've done. It is just far and away it's probably the top brand out there in terms of what they do. And again, why is this so important? They are selling a commodity. They are selling water. And not only that, they're selling water that looks like beer. And this actually goes back to the challenge of being such a category norm defier, right? Where people are going to be like, oh, that just looks like beer. I'm scanning over that. That's in the wrong section, right? And they still have that challenge to date. So what they need to do by violating all of the norms of the category is that they need to build awareness for their brand on what the product is and what the product isn't. And one of the ways they do that is through really good marketing, which they execute on. All the way going back to Mike Cesaria, the fact that he is a marketing guy and kind of creative guy by trade and has built that ethos in the company and team that he has is vitally important to the success of Liquid Death. Let me say that a different way. If I had a client that came to me and we say, hey, this is the brand and this is the name and this is the thing, and it's going to be called Liquid Death and it's going to be sick. But those people are not terribly inherently creative, right? Maybe they're just more like ops and finance guys or something like that. They are going to have a hard time executing on the true potential of Liquid Death because they may not be able to execute on all of those creative ideas. And it becomes hard to outsource that, right? To say, hey, we're just going to hire an agency. It either becomes hard or hyper expensive to do. Hey, we're just going to hire an agency to like do all of the marketing for us. It can fall a little bit flat. So again, if you're going to have this wild and crazy name like this, you need to have that creative muscle and capacity in-house to support all of this and kind of bring it to life. Which also isn't to say that they don't rely on external creators and partners, but there's like a ton more nuance in that. In their marketing, in all of the marketing that they do, what they have done a really important job in realizing is no one gives a shit about us just like talking about our water or talking about like how much plastic that we save. We need to be entertaining because we are on these platforms where we are competing for your attention with the TV shows that you love or the friends of content that you love watching or the creators who you love watching. We're not really competing with other water brands. We are competing with other really entertaining people and ideas and content. And so we need to be equally entertaining. So I view these guys almost as a marketing, as an entertainment company that just happens to sell water is actually how I would evaluate and kind of categorize Liquid Death. And they have done, if you do not follow them, you should follow them. You should watch kind of all of their content, every campaign that they pull out, because it is so well dialed in. They consistently get a ton of organic reach from being so out there and so dialed into who they are. I mean, even their marketing, their email marketing flows. This will give you a sense of, okay, that is how, as a brand with some creative spark behind it, that is how you get attention for your brand and get people to care about you and build some loyalty and trust. And that's what they do, is they do a phenomenal job with this. So this is the kind of breakdown of probably most of my thoughts on the branding of Liquid Death, the marketing, the positioning, as well as the insights that you and I and all of us can apply for our own brands. Does not mean let's take every brand and try to do the Liquid Death model, but how do we tease out these ideas of where do you distribute your product? If you go super creative, how do you support that with kind of requisite marketing? If you are defying category norms, how do you have to support that by building awareness through all of your kind of digital and advertising strategies to make sure that people know what the product is and isn't. And so I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn here. Hopefully you liked this breakdown. Hopefully you liked the format. This was actually my first YouTube video. Anything that you want me to dive more into here as a concept and idea, please drop it in the comments and I can give more examples. And yes, thank you for watching this. I love sharing these insights and hopefully you found this helpful.